Okay, so this is my presentation is the New Jersey Genealogical Resources at the Newark Public Library. My name is Tom Ankner. I am the head of the New Jersey Room. Our formal name is the Charles F. Cummings New Jersey Information Center. And this is the place where people doing genealogical research at the Newark Public Library go. Okay, so first of all, the background of the New Jersey collection. It was first organized in 1929. The Newark Public Library is actually older than that. It was established in the 1880s, and we've been collecting New Jersey-related materials since the establishment of the library in 1889, but we didn't organize them into a formal collection until 1929. And it didn't become a separate department until 1951 with its own reading room and its own management structure. Previous to 1951, it was run by a librarian in our general reference area. But since 1951, we have been our own department. We are actually planning an exhibit at the library later this year to be launched in May to mark the 70th anniversary of the New Jersey Room. So we serve libraries around the state, and we are used by genealogists and researchers across the country, plus some international people as well. We usually have 1 or 2 international emails a month. So the room is named after Charles F. Cummings. He was a librarian, very well known in Newark. He was also the Newark City historian. He died in 2005, and the room was named for him a couple of months after he died because he had run the room for about 40 years, from 1966 until his death in 2005. And he's a much loved figure around Newark and around the state. When I tell people where I work, regardless of where I'm traveling in New Jersey, people will say, "Oh, I know that library. I knew Charles Cummings." And so people have these all kinds of fond memories of Charles. I actually never had the pleasure of meeting him because I didn't start working there until 2010, a few years after he died. So I never met him, unfortunately. So I just later in this program, I hope to be able to show you our website, npl.org, and show you the section of the website where the Cummings Information Center information is. I'm also going to show you our digital archive, which is on a different website, digital.npl.org. We have some information that would be of interest to genealogists on our digital archive, including the Newark City directories, most of which we've digitized. We have some I'm not really going to go into this, but finding aids for our archival collections are available on this archive space site, newarkpubliclibrary.libraryhosts.com. I'm probably not going to go into that today, but that's just something to be aware of. Anyone doing Newark research should know about the Newark Archives project. This is not a project that's run by the Newark Public Library. It's actually run by the Newark History Society and is hosted on the Rutgers Newark website. Anyone doing Newark research at all should go here and do a general search, and it will refer you to any information in our collection at the Newark Public Library, plus many other repositories that have Newark information, the New Jersey Historical Society, the National Archives, the state archives. I mean, there are a number of repositories that have been surveyed by the Newark Archives Project, and there have been finding aids produced for those collections. So that's nap.rutgers.edu. The Newark Archives Project. And it's a good first place to go. It's also a good place to go to find out more about our collections, because they, in some cases, have actually done better descriptions of our collections at the Newark Public Library than we've been able to do with our limited staff. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about some of the newspapers we have available. I know that's something of real interest to a lot of genealogists, particularly people looking for obituaries and death notices. So we house 2 large newspaper archives at the Newark Public Library. The first is the Newark Evening News Archive, which we've had since the mid-1970s. The Newark Evening News, for those of you who haven't lived in New Jersey very long, was at one time the largest and generally considered the best newspaper in New Jersey. It was published from 1883 to 1972. And a couple of years after it folded, we acquired the morgue, the archive of the paper. We acquired both the clippings morgue and the photo morgue. And they are very heavily used even today, 45 years later. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the clippings morgue. There are 3 million news items arranged by subject in the clippings morgue. The subjects range from prominent people to institutions, to places, to companies. We microfilmed this a little over 20 years ago. I think in the 1990s, this was microfilmed. And we still have the microfilm. We have not digitized it, but we do have an index to the clippings morgue on our website, which I will try to show you later. So if you want to know if there's information on something you're doing research on in the clippings morgue, you can go to our website, you can look at the index, and if you see something there, it'll tell you how many articles are on a certain topic, and you can contact us, and we can actually, in many cases, we can actually scan those articles and email them to you. So another item we have in addition to the clippings morgue is we also have indexes to the paper, or indices to the paper. These were handwritten indexes that the paper began producing in 1914, and they go through 1972 when the paper folded. They're little handwritten indexes, maybe this big, like that. And there are name indexes, subject indexes, and geography indexes. The name indexes are most heavily used by genealogists because that's where the obituaries are indexed. Only obituaries are indexed, not death notices. But also any other stories about a person where the person is prominently featured will also show up in the name indexes. So if you have an ancestor who committed a crime or who was injured in a horrible fire, any kind of news story that the person might have been mentioned in, their name should show up in the name index. As I said, obituaries are indexed in there too, but not death notices. So if you have an exact date of death for someone, you can still contact us and we will look for the microfilm for you for 5 days after someone dies. Now, the other indexes are helpful for other things. Geography indexes are helpful if you have someone the geography indexes cover the state of New Jersey. They are indexes by county and by name and by town. So if you have an ancestor who was from Jersey City or Hackensack or Morristown, we can look up news stories from those towns in these geography indexes. The subject indexes cover more national and international topics, but also one subject area that comes up and that we use the subject indexes for, that they're really popular for, is sports. Any stories about baseball, even local high school baseball or football or basketball or track, will show up in the subject index rather than the geography index. So these I just wanted to, I like to include a picture of these indexes. This is a picture of our wall of indexes. These are the indexes that cover the years from 1914 to 1972. And they're like very heavily used, very popular, and an essential resource for anyone doing 20th century New Jersey research, because they do cover, the Newark Evening News did have a statewide scope. I mean, they focused, I guess, more on Essex County and Newark, but they did cover stories from around the state. They were, a lot of people referred to it as the New York Times of New Jersey. And so if you have a question, a question about something in the state and you think you want to know if we have anything about it, you can certainly contact us and we can look in these indexes or in the morgue to see if there's something else. Okay, so this is, I just wanted to include a couple of examples of how I've used the Newark Evening News resources to find information. So this is an ancestor of mine, Gustav York, who was my great-grandfather's brother. All right, so I knew that Gustav York was a Newark police officer, and I had his date of death from getting a death certificate from him at the state archives. But I didn't really know any details about his death other than the cause of death given on his death certificate. So I looked his name up in the 1934 Newark Evening News index, one of those little handwritten indexes I showed you a picture of in the previous slide. And I found that he shows up here, a news story about him from August 6th, 1934. So I got the microfilm for August 6th, 1934. And I looked up this story. It turns out that my great-grandfather's brother was off duty one day, and he was waiting on the sidewalk for a streetcar, and he suddenly collapsed. He dropped dead of a heart attack right there. Kind of an interesting, sad but interesting little story. This is not someone I ever knew, but my great-grandfather is mentioned in the story further down. Charles Hurick was his brother, who was also a Newark police officer. And he was the person, I think it says in here that he was the person who identified the body later on. So that's kind of an interesting little story, something to add to my family story based on this information that I found through using the Newark Evening News indexes. And I might not have found this otherwise if these indexes didn't exist. I mean, I might have just looked for a death notice or an obituary and not really looked for a news story about his death. But this index led me right to the news story. This was another item I found by using the Newark Evening News indexes. This is the engagement story about my grandparents, Rosemary Hurick and Rosemary Hurick and Frank McGarry. I knew they were married in 1935, but I'd never really seen this story before using the indexes. This is an engagement. This is their engagement story from February 11th of 1935. And this is just a little story about the wedding, along with a very nice picture of my grandmother that I'd never seen before. And I'd never even seen her this young before, actually, until I saw this picture in the paper. So that was kind of an interesting little addition to my family tree, too. Okay, so that's the clippings archive and the clippings morgue and the indexes and looking at textual information. We also got, back in the 70s, the photo archive of the Newark Evening News, which consists of about 400,000 black and white New Jersey images. We say about 1920 they begin, but I've been going through the photo archive recently, and I've come up with images earlier than that. I've come up with things as early as like 1908 or 1909. So there are a few images that go back before 1920, but newspaper photography in terms of everyday use of photographs really dates from the 20s. And so most of the photos in that collection begin at around 1920 and they go into the early 1970s, but there are a few from before 1920. And of course they end in the 1970s because that's when the newspaper ended. It went out of business in 72. The biography files are the most relevant for genealogy research. We have a large collection. The bulk of that collection actually is an alphabetical arrangement of little manila envelopes by last name. So basically pictures of people that appeared in the paper during the course from the 20s to the 70s were put into envelopes with the manila envelopes with the person's last name, and then they were alphabetized in these filing cabinets. And we still have those filing cabinets, these somewhat ancient filing cabinets now that we still have these manila envelopes in. We will scan these for people. If you have an ancestor who you think might have had a picture in the Newark Evening News, you can contact us. We can look for an image for you. This is not something you can come in yourself and do. These photos are kept in our offsite storage. So we would have to look for you. But if we find a picture, we will scan the picture for you and email them to you if we find a picture of your ancestor or someone else. And we do charge a fee for that, but it's for personal use, it's only $4 a scan. Okay, so we also, in addition to the Newark Evening News archive, we also have a photo archive to the Star Ledger. And we also have other information about the Star Ledger. We have the microfilm back to 1939 when the Star Ledger became the Star Ledger. It was formed from the merger of the Morning Ledger and the Star Eagle newspaper in November of 1939. And we have the microfilm from 39 to 2018 when they stopped producing microfilm. We also have a database that goes back to 1945. So we were able to search for stories in the Star Ledger, which is nice. We were not able to do that in the Newark Evening News. We're kind of limited to the index to the clippings morgue and also those little handwritten indexes. So we don't have a full text searchable option for the Newark News, but we do for the Star Ledger, at least back to 1945. Charles Cummings, who I mentioned earlier, used to index the paper every day, and we still have his card file index, which covers the 1970s and 1980s. That's sometimes a more targeted way of finding information, but it's kind of selective, so we don't really use that too much anymore. We usually use the database. But part of that card file index is online, and that's on our catalog, which I can show you later. We also keep clippings of obituary and death notice lists from 1971 to 2007. So they, in the Star Ledger every day, they have a list of the obituaries that appeared in that day's paper. We clipped those for many years, and we still have those binders available. But again, since we've had the database for the last few years, we use that more often than anything else. We also, in addition to all of that material, we obtained the Star Ledger photo archive in 2014. So the Star Ledger, for those of you who might not know, is no longer in Newark. They sold their building in Newark in 2014, and they moved out of Newark, and they are now located in I think it's rented space. It's a rented office space in Woodbridge. But when they moved out of their building, they didn't want to take their hard copy photos with them. So they gave them to us, and that's, we've never counted the images. We think there are at least 1 million of them. It's a very large collection, about 200 boxes plus 36 filing cabinets. And we have them, and that's another very heavily used collection. We get requests for photos that were in the Star Ledger all the time. And again, we can scan these for personal use and send them to you. If you want to publish an image from the Star Ledger, you'd have to get their permission first before we can do that. But we do have permission from them to scan for personal use, because even though we house the hard copy photos, we do not have the copyright to that material. The NJ Advanced Media, the company that publishes the Star Ledger, has retained copyright to those images. But they do allow us to scan for personal use and with their permission to scan for publication. And so that we acquired that in 2014. So I want to go into some other this is about newspapers, so I want to talk about some of the other newspapers we have. We have Newark daily papers back to 1832. The corporate predecessor of the Star Ledger was the Newark Daily Advertiser, which began publishing in 1832, March of 1832. It was the first daily newspaper in New Jersey. And it published until 1907. We have that on microfilm. Plus, for those of you who have access to Genealogy Bank, the Advertiser is in Genealogy Bank from 1832 to 1866. We also have, in addition to the Advertiser, we also have selected New Jersey papers back to the late 18th century. Oh, and also, I forgot to mention, in addition to the Advertiser, we have some other Newark papers back to 1832. We have the Daily Mercury, there's a few others that were published in the 1860s and 70s. We also have selected New Jersey papers back to the late 18th century. And a list of all of the papers in our collection is available on npl.org. Just some of the historic newspapers we have include the Washington Whig, which we have selected issues from 1815 to 1820. The Sentinel of Freedom, which was a Newark paper, we have selected issues from 1796 to 1820. And that's another paper that I believe is available in Genealogy Bank as well, if you have access to that. The New Jersey Gazette, we have some selected issues from the 1770s and 1780s. Some current newspapers that we have on microfilm for certain years. We have the Bergen Record on microfilm from 1962 to 2010, and the Jersey Journal from 1957 to 2011. We do not have any indexing to these papers, though, or any way to search them. We only have the microfilm. So if you contact us for an obituary that might have been in one of these papers, we're going to need an exact date of death or a date of burial in order to look, because we have no way of searching these papers. We just have the microfilm, unlike the Newark papers we have. Some non-English newspapers we have, all published in New Jersey, are these are just a couple of examples. Luso Americano, which was a Portuguese paper. I'm not sure what years we have of that. I think up into at least the 80s or 90s on microfilm. We have the New Jersey Freie Zeitung, which was a German newspaper. We have that from 1880 to 1930. That we've had for years, and I always mention it in these presentations. It almost never gets asked for, but I did have it asked for like 2 or 3 weeks ago by a genealogist who had been to one of these presentations and had heard me mention that we had a German newspaper. And so he asked for a German language obituary, actually 2 German language obituaries, 2, a husband and wife who died about a week apart. And I found both of them for him, even though reading that paper is, if you're not fluent in German, it's a little hard and you have to kind of look at it really closely, and it uses this kind of old English script or old German script. It's not easy to look at. The Freie Zeitung, certain years are in Genealogy Bank as well, but not the years that I was trying to find a few weeks ago, unfortunately. So I had to use the microphone. A few other newspapers we have. We have some community weeklies, the Caldwell Progress. Most of our community weeklies are Essex County weeklies. Caldwell Progress we have from 1911 to 1941. We have a series of Irvington weeklies from 1872 to 1945. And I don't think we have an all-inclusive run of any of those papers. We just have some isolated issues. The Vailsburg Leader, Vailsburg is a neighborhood in Newark. We have, there was a weekly paper that covered that neighborhood for many years, and we have that on microfilm from 1959 to 1991. And there are several others too that I don't mention here. But again, a full list of all the newspapers in our collection is on our website. Some special interest newspapers. The New Jersey Afro-American, which was an African-American paper. The New Jersey affiliate of the Afro-American newspaper in Baltimore. We have that, a full run of that on microfilm from 1941 to 1988. The Newark Herald, which was also an African-American newspaper published in Newark. We have some few issues from the 30s and 40s and some other issues from the mid 60s. There were only a handful of issues microfilms, so we don't have anything other than that. Unfortunately, much of that paper is lost, which is too bad because they had more local coverage than the Afro-American. And this is something that if more of the paper had been microfilmed, it would be really helpful to us because we get these questions all the time. And the Newark Herald does not have copyright restrictions on it, so we were able to digitize it, unlike the Afro-American, which is the copyright is still held by a company that's still in business. Some other newspapers we have were the Jewish Chronicle, which was a paper published from 1921 to 1943, the Jewish Post, which was published in the 30s and 40s, and the New Jersey Jewish News, which we have on microfilm from when it started publishing in 1946 until the present day. They had announced they'd stopped publishing last year, but they've come out with paper issues since then, so I'm not sure what's going on with that. We're still getting the paper issues, but we also have the microfilm for many of those years. The Jewish News has also been digitized for certain years by the Jewish Historical Society of New Jersey, and the database, the last time I checked, was available free on their website. We also have the Italian Tribune, 1934 to present, some of those years on microfilm. So we have digitized some of the papers in our collection. We really had to stick to things that were not copyright restricted and things that met the guidelines of the grant we got a few years ago, and that were not too large that it would take up too much space on in our digital archive. But these online newspapers are available through digital.npl.org. Mostly community and special interest papers, includes the New Jersey Herald News, the African-American newspaper I mentioned earlier, plus a paper of Trilingual Ironbound Voices. That's a neighborhood newspaper in Newark that we actually don't own that paper. It's owned by a group called the Ironbound Community Corporation, and they made their copies available for us to digitize and gave us permission to digitize them and make them available on our website, which was wonderful for us and wonderful for them. Worked out really well. The New Community Clarion, which is another Newark newspaper, New Community Corporation, is a nonprofit corporation in Newark that builds housing builds public housing, and they have a newspaper that we have digitized, some on digital.npl.org. Okay, so that's newspapers. I also wanted to talk today about some of the city directories we own. We have a large collection of city directories for communities across the state back to the 19th century, mostly northern New Jersey. We have wide coverage for northern New Jersey, but we also have city directories for several communities in South Jersey. We have both hard copy and microfilm, many of these, and we have a list of our city directories is available on our website, npl.org, which I'll show you later. So the Newark City Directories, which is of course our most extensive city directory collection because we are the Newark Public Library. We have a full run from 1835 to 1964. Newark stopped publishing a city directory in 1964. We have them in both print and microfilm, and we have also digitized them. We, a few years ago with this grant that I mentioned earlier, we digitized almost all of our Newark City directories. The only one we didn't digitize was 1964, which is still under copyright, but all of the others were digitized and are available from digital.npl.org. However, we recently changed platforms for our digital archive, and we have the transition from one platform to another has been riddled with problems, many more problems than we expected. And if we had known that we were going to have these many problems, we probably would not have switched platforms. But one of the side effects of the switch of platforms is that it has made many of the early Newark City directories inaccessible. From the 1830s when they start until at least the 1860s are not searchable or not available. And so if you're looking for something for that time period, you can contact us and we can look up in the print city directories that we have available in the library. Okay, so just an example of what the kind of information you would find in a city directory. And you've all, I'm assuming most of you have done genealogical research, so you're probably familiar with this already. I just want to show, this is a page from the 1915 Newark City directory. This is from our digital archive. And I just wanted to highlight, the image on the right is a highlight from the page of ancestors of mine. Hurick is, my grandmother's maiden name was Hurick. And these are four people from the Urick family. Charles was her father, my great-grandfather. He was a policeman. His brother was Gustav. He's the fellow who dropped dead on the sidewalk in 1934. Margaret at the bottom is Charles's mother, my great-great-grandmother. And Anna is Charles's sister. Charles and Gustav's sister. And these, it was for what what's most interesting about the city directors is that you find out where people were living. Like the 71 Magnolia address here, until I looked the family up in the city directories, I had no idea that they lived in that neighborhood. I didn't even know where Magnolia Street was until I saw it in the city directory. And then I went and looked it up, and I had to look it up on a map to see where it was. It's like in the Central Ward, not where Halstead Street I knew about, the 25 Halstead Street. But it's interesting because you find out things about your family that you just didn't know by looking in the city directories. You also of course find out what they did for a living. All right, so if, some other resources that we have that are of interest to genealogists. We have a list of African Americans, 19th century African Americans in Newark. The 19th century city directories used to indicate that someone was African American with the word colored after the person's name, which of course was a racist practice, of course. But ironically, for people doing family history research today, it can actually be rather helpful. Because if you have an ancestor with a common last name, and there are like 6 or 7 John Smiths, but only 2 of the John Smiths have the word colored after the name, and you're an African-American person doing genealogy research, you can figure out that one of those most likely is your John Smith. Anyway, at one point, and we don't know where these came from, we had in one of our archives boxes lists of African-American churches and residents in Newark from the years 1869 to 1889. At some point, someone had gone through the city directories, the Newark city directories for those years, and compiled these lists, which have been used recently. We actually digitized these and made them available on our digital archive because they're really helpful, and people use them to find out, what African-American churches were in existence in the city at a certain time, what the names of residents who were living in the city at a certain time. But this is just one kind of really useful resource that comes out of a racist practice, but it actually turns out to be a useful resource. And I'm not trying to make excuses for the racist practice they come from. I'm just saying this is kind of an irony, karma, we might call it. Okay, so another resource we have, moving on to something else, we have New Jersey phone books, a really helpful a collection of microfilm on New Jersey phone books covering most of the 20th century. They cover from about 1908 to 1990. This is a microfilm set for, I think it's basically every phone book across the state that that was controlled by AT&T for those years, from about 1908 to 1990. And these get used a lot. We get asked for, I mean, it's more common for people to ask for city directory information, but for the years when there were not city directories, or, you know, just because if people just want to know where someone lived and what their phone number was, we get a lot of requests for these phone books, and they're really useful. We have the print phone books for Newark from 1972 for present. The only phone books we have in actually hard copy are the Newark phone books, and we have them back to 1972. But the microfilm phone books are fantastic. They cover most of the 20th century and most of the state. So if you ever have questions that you think a phone book could answer, definitely contact us. We get all kinds of questions using the phone books. I once was there on a Saturday. I was working the desk on a Saturday. We got a call from an elderly woman who had a bet with her brother, who she wanted to know what their phone number was in 1956. She had grown up in Newark, and she and her brother had a bet about what their phone number was in 1956. And so I went and got the 1956 Newark phone book on microfilm, and I looked it up, and she won the bet. She was very happy. So we also get used for another use for the phone books. Another time I got a call from someone, I think it was again on a Saturday or maybe a Wednesday evening. Someone remembered that there was a children's clothing store on the Atlantic City Boardwalk in 1965 or 66, the mid 60s, but he couldn't remember the name of it. And so I went and I looked up the Atlantic City Yellow Pages for 1965, and I scanned the page and I sent it to him, and the page of clothing stores, and I sent it to him, and he said one of the companies in the list was the company he was looking for, and looking at it on the page, it jogged his memory, and he remembered the name of the company. Another kind of weird little question we get, but the phone books are useful for. In addition to the phone books, we also have crisscross directories, but only for Essex County. We don't have them for statewide. Crisscross directories were kind of successors to, successors to the city directories. The city, there was always a section in many of the city directories where you could look up things by address. And, addresses were alphabetized, and you could look up people by address rather than by name. In the 60s and 70s, when a lot of locations stopped publishing city directories, we lost that resource. And so we began getting crisscross directories in the early 70s, where you can look up people by address. These are alphabetical listings by address, and we have them for Newark and Essex County back to the early 70s. The Newark crisscross directories start in 1972, and the suburban Essex County crisscross directories start in 74. We also have, in addition to the crisscross directories, we also have a big map collection. We have more than 2,500 maps, both historic and current. We have maps for Newark, but we also have maps from across the state, north, south, central Jersey, etc. We have Sanborn maps on microfilm for communities across New Jersey. And we have Newark fire atlases from 1868. The only maps we've really digitized have been the Newark maps. So most of our maps are only available in hard copy. But the Newark maps, most of our Newark maps have been digitized, except for a few. We have a few like sewer system maps that the city gave to us and asked us not to digitize. They didn't want them available online. And a few other maps that, like Hagstrom maps that we were worried about copyright over. But otherwise, most of our Newark maps are digitized at digital.npl.org, including the fire atlases, which cover the years 1868 to 1926 and are really useful in digital format. So this is just an example of a flat map. This is an Essex County map from 1889. And this is from our digital archive. This is one of the maps that we've digitized. This is from the 1868 Atlas. Most people know the Sanborn Atlases. That's one brand of fire insurance atlases. Excuse me. The fire atlases are used by fire insurance companies to determine what customers pay in fire insurance rates. And so the really useful thing about the fire atlases for people who are not in the insurance industry is that they show structures. They will show you, like if you look at a map here, it will show you where buildings are, which street maps don't show you that. This will show you what where there were buildings and what the buildings were made of. The red squares, the red rectangles on these maps are brick buildings. The yellow rectangles are wood frame buildings. And I'm not sure what the green is. I'd have to look that up in the key. But because they were used by fire insurance companies, it was useful to find out what a building was made of to determine what the fire insurance rates would be for that building. But they're also useful to genealogists by showing you where buildings are, where there actually are buildings and where there are empty lots. Okay, so another resource we have in addition to our maps is our information file, what a lot of libraries call a vertical file. We call an information file. We still add to our information file. We still clip the Star Ledger every day. We clip some other newspapers as well, plus some magazines whenever we see something of interest in a magazine. And these are more than 4,000 clippings arranged by subject. As I said, they're still maintained by library staff. We divide them into Newark and New Jersey. So we have a Newark information file and a New Jersey information file. And within that, we also have current and historic information files. So there's a current Newark and a historic Newark information file. There's a current New Jersey and a historic New Jersey information file. My cat is chewing on my notebook. I'm trying to get her out of the way. And so for us, historic is anything before about 1970, and current is 1970 forward. So the information file includes obituaries for people of local and statewide prominence. Might be of use to somebody doing genealogical research. And a list of subjects in the information file is available at npl.org. I can show you that later. So going back to pictures, I mentioned pictures earlier when I talked about the Newark Evening News and the Star Ledger photo archives. We also have other pictures as well. We have a cataloged picture collection, which is actually only a small portion of our total picture collection. Most of our images are not cataloged. Most of them, like the Star Ledger and the Newark Evening News images, most of those images have not been cataloged. They're basically, you have to call us or email us to find out if we have a photo on a certain topic or of a certain person. But we have a catalog picture collection of more than 35,000 images, includes prints, illustrations, postcards, photos, and books. It is arranged by subject, and again, we divide it into Newark and New Jersey. We have a Newark picture collection and a New Jersey picture collection, and these images can all be scanned for a fee. And we have our illustration index. The index to the picture collection is available on our catalog, which I'll show you later. Just an example of some of the Newark photos we have. This is a picture of, on the left, it's the Bamberger's, which was a department store in Newark. And this is the main building in downtown Newark from 1935. That building still stands, but of course Bamberger's not in it anymore. It's a server farm now. I think that's what I've heard, at least. That building is used as a server farm now. The picture on the right is a picture of President Kennedy. He visited Newark on Columbus Day in 1962 and gave a speech at City Hall. This is a picture of him from that day. Some of the non-Newark photos we have. The picture on the left is a picture of Hillside at Christmas time in 1951. And on the right is, the picture on the left is from the Newark Evening News. Picture on the right from the Star Ledger is a picture from Edison of a dioxin cleanup in 1983. The joke that I always like to say is that you can't do a presentation on New Jersey without including something about toxic waste. So I'm from New Jersey, so I can say that. Okay, so those are some of the New Jersey photos we have available. Some personal photos we have. And again, this is a family photo of mine. I went looking in the Newark Evening News biographical files to see if there were any Hurick pictures. Hurick is a family name for my family. And this was Charles Hurick. This is my grandmother's brother, also my godfather. He was about 18 when this picture was taken, and I guess he was just going into the military during World War II, and his picture appeared in the paper. This was a picture that they, at least was submitted to the paper. I'm not sure it actually appeared in the paper. In the photo archive of the Newark Evening News, it's filled with pictures of people, of Newarkers mainly, but also people from other nearby towns who served in the military during World War II, during Korea, during Vietnam. The military, particularly during Vietnam, produced these little press releases with little photos of local, and then sent those press releases to the local paper. And so the photo archive of the Newark Evening News is filled with those little press releases with the attached photos. And it's really cool if you have an ancestor who lived in Newark or Essex County and served in one of the wars, you could contact us. We could, send you the press release and the photo. And it's really kind of interesting. I guess it was a way of generating, enthusiasm for the war and the military. Okay, so some of the other material we have available. This is, somewhat less useful to genealogists, but somewhat, can be used somewhat in your research. We have a collection of Newark City documents going back several decades, Essex County documents, as state documents going back to the 19th century, most of which are kept off-site. We have a group of quasi or Q docs for non-governmental organizations, the YMCA, the ACLU, the Urban League, groups like that. Most of these are not cataloged. We have a card file in our reading room where we can look up to see if we have a document on a certain topic and from a certain agency, and you can call or email us if you want to see if we have a certain document. We have a lot of things that, a lot of state documents that people would otherwise have to go to the state library for. So it's, if you're looking for something and you don't feel like going down to Trenton or dealing with Trenton, we can maybe look for it for you. And if we find it, we can scan it for you and send it to you. The only documents we've really digitized are some of the Newark City documents. Again, they're on our digital archive, digital.npl.org. We've digitized like the Newark Housing Authority documents, some of them. Some from the Newark Human Rights Commission, which was a civil rights group in the 50s and 60s. The Newark Central Planning Board, we've also digitized some of their documents. We also have on microfilm some Essex County records from the 19th and early 20th centuries, which include marriage records, and name changes, and certificates of incorporation, a few court records. The problem with this collection, this is a microfilm set, and the problem with it is that it's not indexed. So, and it's all stuff, and it's not arranged by date or anything. It's really hard to use. And so if you want to use it, you would have to come in to go through the microfilm. It's just we don't really use it because it's so badly organized. It was like this big dump of stuff, but it's potentially useful. I mean, if people want to come in and go through it, you might find some marriage records for ancestors. I mean, when we get calls for people looking for marriage certificates, we tell them, well, we don't have that here. We refer them to the state archives or the state health, the state health department. But we do actually have a few marriage certificates in this collection. It's just because it's not indexed, there's no real way of finding it. Unfortunately, this is definitely a candidate for digitization when we get the money in the future. We also have the New Jersey state censuses on microfilm from 1855 to 1915. The microfilm for 1875, we have the Essex County portion of it. For those of you who don't know, most of the 1875 state census is missing. It was brought to the 1876 Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia and never got back to Trenton. But there were 4 counties, Essex County was one of them, that kept their portion, the county portions of the census in book form. And so at some point, Essex County microfilmed the 1875 Essex County portion of the census, and we have that microfilm so that we can look for things in the 1875 state census for if it's an Essex County material. We have a ward index for Newark addresses, which is how you find things in that state census. Now, some of these are online. Some of the state censuses are online, not through us, but through ancestry.com and familysearch.org. I believe 1885 through 1915, I believe, is available in either one of those, either ancestry.com or familysearch.org. But we have them on microfilm going back to 1855 when they first began producing them. A few other things that we have. We had a microfilm set, Essex County slave records from the early, from the 18th and the early 19th centuries, mostly manumissions. We digitized that a few years ago, and that's on digital.npl.org. We have a full run of the Genealogical Magazine of New Jersey, which is published by the Genealogical Society of New Jersey. We also have the name indexes to the Genealogical Magazine of New Jersey, which will cover up until the mid-1970s. We also have the Proceedings of the New Jersey Historical Society back to 1867, and up until when they stopped producing a few years ago, I believe. A few other things we have. Mount Pleasant Cemetery is a cemetery in Newark. We have burial records from Mount Pleasant from 1845 when the cemetery opened up until about 2000. We've tried to update those records, but we haven't really been able to get the more recent records, but we have the records up until 2000. So if you know someone who might be buried there, you can contact us and we can look up the person's name and find them out. We have some indexes for New Jersey, indexes for the dead from World War I, World War II, and Korean War dead from New Jersey. The index for World War II is only partial. Part of it has disappeared, and we're not quite sure what happened to it. But we have a partial index for World War II and a pretty much complete index for the other two wars. We have an Ancestry.com subscription, which is available in the library and for at least the foreseeable future, also available to people with the Newark Public Library card at home. Normally Ancestry.com is not available at home, but we were able to work out an arrangement with them where Newark Public Library card holders are able to search Ancestry.com on our subscription at home. And a list of some other genealogical resources is available on our website. All right, so this is our contact information. We can be reached by phone at 973-733-7775, but we prefer email. It's nice to use email because you can actually type out your request and we can actually type back, and we can send you, if we find something that we can just email to you, we can do it in the return email. Our email is njreference@npl.org. We are open. I know there are a lot of libraries that are not open, so we can be visited in person. Our hours are, we have kind of limited hours now because of COVID, but you can come in person. We are located at 5 Washington Street in Newark, New Jersey. For those of you who are familiar with Newark, we are at the north end of Washington Park, right where Washington Street and Broad Street come together. And I guess that's it. So